Launch sequence activated.
This is not a drill.
Hi, Alma Katsu. I am so excited to have you here. All the amazing things you're doing. We're going to be talking about Red London. We're going to be talking about all sorts of things, how you came from intelligence career to writing, which is kind of exciting. There's hope for all of us. And the first thing that I want to find out, though, is about the first book, The Taker, which was the dream book. It is what we all hope for.
Yeah, it was. It really was. I was very lucky, but I'll start with the writing process. It took forever. I actually had given up writing fiction. I started out wanting to be a novelist. You know, that's what my undergraduate degree was in, was starting to write short stories. And we all know what an incredibly hard slog that is. But then I went to work in intelligence, and they don't really like you writing on the outside. At least back then, it was really frowned upon. So I figured I would just stop and pay attention to my career for a while. And I didn't come back to it till I turned 40. And that's because I got really sick and we weren't sure, you know, it's a long story, but to comfort myself, I started writing fiction again. And it took me out of my troubles so much that I said, if I recover, I want to take up writing fiction again. Not thinking I'd ever get published, just really wanting to learn how to write a novel. So I did recover, sort of, and I decided to go back to graduate school. And but it basically took me 10 years of writing every day to get the story to a place where it was saleable. And like a lot of people, you know, I queried too soon. It got rejected a million times. But by the time it was finally ready to go, and there was still something that needed work, but I just couldn't figure out what it was. And we can talk about all the things that are in The Taker that you shouldn't do for a debut novel. But, you know, I only queried 2 agents. They both wanted it. It ended up going to auction, you know, and the rest. Simon and Schuster ended up deciding that they were going to make it one of their big books for the fall season, and they put a lot of effort behind it, and it was all wonderful. You know, a lot of foreign language rights sold, and you know, they sent me out to Comic-Con, you know, for my debut tour. I didn't know how good I had it, but with all of that support comes a lot of expectations from the publisher. And the other thing that I wasn't aware of until I got in the publishing business is there's just a lot of business stuff that goes on that you as the author have absolutely no control over, but it's going to affect you and there's nothing you can do about it. It seems like the stars really have to be aligned for you to have that success that we all dream of, you know, that your first book and it's a huge hit and it makes the New York Times bestseller list, and the rest of your career, you know, is just an easy skate in the park. That's really a myth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's why it's so good to have you here, because there are so many myths to writing. Like, I'm going to write a book and get rich is one of them. Or I'm going to get an advance. We all want that advance, and we don't realize it is actually an advance on money earned in the future. And if there's a million translations and covers and promotions and marketing, that is that advance, that future advance being spent. So I love that you have that first take of like the dream project, the what we all hope for, and the reality of it.
Yeah, it hasn't been that way since. There were a couple business things that happened that really kind of ended up derailing the trilogy, so that by the time the 3rd book came out, you know, they didn't even do a hardcover. It just went out in trade paperback, and all of the editors who'd been associated with it had left the company by that time. I got orphaned in the UK. So really the UK editor who bought The Taker was a huge fan of it. And she was the head of the imprint. She went on to become the head of HarperCollins over there. And she was the creative force behind it. So, but she left 2 weeks after my book came out in the UK, and I was orphaned over there. And those kinds of things make a lot of difference. If your editor is not on the ball, forget it. You know, you're not going to get promoted. The publishing house is not going to keep up with you, with your book.
Mm-hmm.
And you just sort of fall along the side of the road.
Yeah. Well, and that's what they say, from my experience, what has been true is even the top of the top, there's still so much work that we as the author wind up doing in the places that we don't expect to do, like promotional things. I think a lot of times we're like, I want to be in my office, I want to write the book, send it out, and now I'm done. I'm writing another book. But that's not the case.
That's not the case. I've been lucky enough to be with one of the big five my whole career. And the majority, I don't know how it is with smaller presses or more independent press, but the majority of promotion falls on the author. And that includes more than just social media. Although honestly, social media seems to be the only marketing plan most publishers have, and that's up to you. But, you know, when a book's going to come out, if you're lucky, your publicist works with you to try to place like essays at literary sites, you know. So for Red London, for instance, I ended up doing 2 articles for Crime Reads, which is part of the LitHub family of literary sites. So you're writing, you're writing essays and articles, you're doing Q&As. A lot of those you're doing. Yeah. Not somebody else. It looks like somebody else is interviewing you, but you're actually writing the whole article. You know, podcasts, and if you're lucky, radio shows and stuff like that. So it's a lot of promotion. I generally budget like a whole month when a book's coming out. I budget a whole month for promotion when means I'm not getting any writing done. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which as a writer is unfortunate. And I want to go back to Red London in a second, but just you started out as a writer and then you went to intelligence, and I thought it was like you were intelligence and then you went to writing. So that's a really interesting, like triple take.
Yeah, I feel kind of bad because I've often. Oh,
sorry.
That's okay. That's your dogs. I thought it'd be mine. This is the reality for a lot of people. You have to hold a full-time job in order to write. I'm lucky now, I'm retired, but I had a full-time job for a long time while I was writing novels too. And some people think of that as, that means you're not a successful writer. No, very few writers write full-time. Only that handful of people at the very top, like Harlan Coben or those kinds of folks. Most of us have at least one job on the side.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you bring that up, because I just saw a really sad thing on Facebook where a writer, of course, I'm not going to name names, but they were just very discouraged. And they were like, I just can't make this writing career thing. I'm almost homeless. I can't sell my work. I've just quit. And it was kind of like no, you're doing it wrong. You don't start out with nothing and try to forge this career. I have a retirement. I'm upfront. I have a retirement from the government. That is why I can do this full time, 100%. Yeah. Royalties are great sometimes.
That's why those myths, I think, are dangerous. But the publishing industry, like a lot of industries, we tell a lot of fairy tales, basically, because that's what readers want to hear. Oh, I wrote a book and I sold it right away, and what a wonderful life I had. I'm so lucky. A lot of times that's complete BS, guys. The person had been writing for 6 years, 8 years, whatever, but you get pressured to tell these myths, to spin the story, because it's what people want to hear.
Right.
My professional background is I was an intelligence analyst. Our motto is speak truth to power. So I tend to tell the truth, even though it's not going to sell me more books. But that's what I mean. Those myths can be very harmful. And that's a prime example of it.
Yeah. Because it's not one or the other. It is going to be both. Unless you're that 0.5%, I think that, it does wind up working. But going back to the intelligence thing, because this is kind of where I'm really curious, how does that inform your writing? You have a lot of supernatural stuff, which I don't know if the CIA is looking into, like ghost activity. So you've got like these interesting elements that go into your stories. Like how does that
So
work?
it's not really, except for the spy stories, of course. It's not that I write about topics or things that I did, but it's more like the skills I acquired are transferable to writing. So for instance, basically for 2/3 of my career, I was a research analyst. So I'm a very good researcher, for instance. I from small things to huge things. I've run huge projects for Rand, for instance, huge studies. So I'm really good at handling research on a book, and I don't worry if it's a big research project. So like those historical horror novels were fairly complex research projects, and by complex I mean like it had various elements that you just couldn't get away from. So for instance, the Donner Party story, it was not only the story of 100 people in a wagon train, it was tied to specific geographical places at specific times. There was a very strict timeline. So there were all these elements that you had to track and juggle and pull together. And I know that would probably make some people run screaming. They came up and told me at the end of, when I did an event or something, they're like, how do you do that? Well, do it for 30 years. You'll, it'll be second nature. I actually even teach a workshop on how to research like a professional researcher. And it's very different than what people think of. So yeah, there's that. The other thing that was sort of funny, when I wrote The Taker early on, I, because Simon had made such a big commitment to it, they brought me up to New York, and I had lunch like with all these vice presidents of Simon. And one of them turned to me, this woman, and she said, all the characters in your book, they're so twisty and manipulative. Was it your work in intelligence that made you able to write that? And I looked at her, and first, of course, I thought, this has nothing to do with intelligence. But then I thought, and I'm like, you are absolutely right. You're brilliant. Because when you work in intelligence, particularly when you work in what we call human intelligence or HUMINT, which is CIA's purview, you really get to understand human psychology, what motivates people, why they do certain things, why they behave. And that feeds into all of my characters. I really have character-driven books. They're not plot-driven. So the character development is very important to me. And that is something that reviewers have sort of pointed out, that the characters are so well developed. And that's something I learned in intelligence, how to read that from people. Once people understand I'm doing that, though, then they don't want to be around me.
Yes, now I'm going to be watching myself. Oh, is that a tick? I mean, I am telling the truth. Now that's something like, because I'm reading The Fervor the second time right now, which, congratulations, Stoker nomination, Stoker finalist. I am rooting for The Fervor.
Thank you.
But yeah, so I'm reading that again. But my second time around, I'm looking into the background and stuff, and I'm running a book club on it. And so one of the things I did was I used to work for newspapers. So that is my thing, is a random title of a town I've never heard of. Let me look that up. And so from that, then I found out all this stuff about I can't remember his name, the main character, the Reverend. Yes. Yeah. And all of that is true. Like all of that really happened. And you tell that story. I mean, it's true. So when I read it on, say, Wikipedia, it's like a dusty thing that happened. But you brought that together so vividly that I felt like it was a real person. Well, surprise, he is a real person. But is that something that, is that one of the things that drives you to write historical fiction, which I will say you have made me a fan of? I wasn't necessarily somebody who would pick up historical fiction because I don't want to read about women in corsets. But you are amazing. And that just knowing that connection, because now I want to go to Bly, Oregon, things I never thought I'd say in my life.
I don't know if I want to go to Bly, Oregon. People have told me in Klamath Falls that they're not as folksy and wonderful as they sound. Well, thank you. I do enjoy writing historical fiction, but I've learned a lesson over the course of those 3 books. The Hunger, which is the Donner Party story reimagined, is very, very close to the history. Almost all the characters are real people. as I said, it's very much tied to the actual journey that the wagon party took. And while I really enjoyed doing it, I always felt this little twinge because the books, all of my historical horror, are not like documentaries, right? They're not meant to just be a retelling of the story we know. They have their own themes, you know, their own, what they're written for. And as a writer, I have to create the characters that are going to support the story and push those themes. So I had to change them, right? And I felt so bad because it's like, it wasn't bad enough that the poor person ended up being a cannibal, but I've got to make him a drunkard or an adulterer or something, right? And I was projecting this on real people, even though my characters weren't those people. They were carrying the name and living their role. So the next book, which was The Deep, and that's a reimagining of the story of the Titanic, more of the major characters were fictional. There's still some characters that existed in real life, and a lot of the history is close, but I felt a little more comfortable projecting these crazy things on fictional characters. And, you know, and people do take offense, I have to say. Some people get very mad that I've changed the lives of fictional characters, I mean, of the characters in the work of fiction. But what can you do? You can't talk to every single person. All the way over to the Fervor, which is mostly made up. There's a lot of history, but only a handful of the characters are real people. The rest are completely fictional. And it was easiest to tell the story and really shape the theme that I wanted to do by doing that. But one thing that's been really gratifying is I get a lot of comments from readers who say that the stories made them want to go and find out the actual history because they want to find out what's true and what was made up. And that's a lot of fun for me to know that I fooled them so completely that they fell down the rabbit hole.
That's awesome, which is the goal of the writer, isn't it? Is to tell a lie so expertly that it becomes truth.
Yep.
Well,
absolutely.
Yes, that sounded very deceptive the way I said that, but in a nice way.
Yeah. Well, it's the art that is a mirror on life, right? If you try to tell somebody something, like the theme of the hunger is man and monster, you know, under you know, there are circumstances under which any man can be turned into a monster. And I, as an analyst, I work genocides and mass atrocities. I'm here to tell you that's true. You get people who say, oh, I could never kill another person. Believe me, somebody can figure out a way to make you kill another person. Anyway, so that's the theme of the book. And but if I just sit down and tell you, you don't want to kill your neighbors, you don't want to be part of a genocide, that's going to fall on deaf ears, right? But if you show them a work of art that makes them feel the importance of your message, you're more likely to be able to influence them. That's why we have art.
I think that's wonderful. And such a good point too, because it's easy in a perfect situation in my house where I have food and everything is safe to say I would never do these horrible things. But yeah, we all, and not believing that we have that, I think makes us more vulnerable to doing it. To, you know, I would never, anytime somebody says I would never, I think, oh, yes, you would. You would probably do it faster than I would, because I think I would do that. And I'm horrified by that, but you know. So.
Well, you know, you have your eyes open. Speaking of eating people, I just read.
I love you.
Yeah, people send me any book with cannibals in it for blurbs, right? I read a lot of cannibal books. But I recently was given one to read. It's Allie Wilkes's next book. It's called Where the Dead Wait. Oh my God. I mean, it's a cannibal book. It is amazing. I mean, she plumbed the depths of what it means to be in that situation where you have to eat other people. It's wonderful. She did such an amazing job. So if you like cannibal stories, put that on your calendar.
I will. I shouldn't admit this, but I have many times that I am probably cannibal curious. I mean, I'm like, I'm not hungry for human flesh, but it's something that fascinates me. Like, you know, just what makes somebody turn that way, you know, which we kind of think of as like the biggest atrocity, but some cultures actually do that as an honorable thing, like to, you know, consume their dead and then, you know, kind of things like that.
Yeah, I don't know how much you want to get into book,
No.
I had to learn a lot about, practice and history and that sort of thing. And I did find that most people don't like to talk about cannibalism at all, but some people love to talk about cannibalism. I had one event where everybody wanted to talk about, and it was a little off-putting. But yeah, I mean, historically, it was a more common practice than most people think of, if for no other reason than the law of the sea. Before airplanes, you had to take big ships to get places, and they often sank or there was a problem. And so it was well known that it was law of the sea, that they could eat your corpse or draw straws and somebody was going to lose. So, it's just more in modern times that it's such a huge cultural taboo. I'm not advocating killing people and eating them. I'm just saying.
Yes, officially, we do not support cannibalism, but it is an interesting topic to consider. Well, how about Red London? That is what your very latest hot book coming out. Can you tell us a little bit about that and the process for where this story came from?
Sure. Well, in general, I hadn't intended to write a spy series. Mostly because I was still working. Again, they don't really want you to do that, even if it gets through review with no classified information or whatever. So it wasn't until after I retired that my editor said, I know you've always wanted to write a spy book. Why don't you give it a shot? And so, I had already written 5 books by then, I think. And it's kind of odd because usually publishers like you to stay in one genre. It's easier to build your career, to build on your audience than jumping around genres. You lose people's attention. And there's a lot of little things that the publishing industry does to market you that runs completely counter to. So stuff that you wouldn't see, but I see, unfortunately. So, so the first book came out, Red Widow. That was a couple years ago, and it did so well critically. It was a New York Times Editor's Choice, and it was nominated for the International Thriller Writers Book of the Year, and it didn't get it, but to get nominated was amazing.
Yeah. And
so now the second book just came out a couple weeks ago, Red London. It's set in London, obviously. It's almost a standalone. Like, you could start with this book. You don't have to read Red Widow first. The main character is the same, but everything you need to know about the backstory is sort of explained. And so I just throw that out there because it's really getting great reviews. It was designed to be sort of part domestic suspense and part spy thriller. So half of the chapters are in the voice of this woman, Emily Rotenberg. She is British, but she's married to a Russian oligarch. And she's struggling with the fact that, she's married to somebody who's not very good. And after the invasion of Ukraine, of course, their lives get tremendously complicated, as do all the Russian oligarchs in London. And then the other half, of course, is a spy story. So what happens is we're in a slightly future time where Putin has disappeared. He's gone. He disappeared one night. Nobody knows what happened to him. There's a new Russian president in town, and he's saying all the right things about Russia wanting to be a good international citizen, but CIA and MI6 don't believe him. And so they want Lindsay, that's the main character, to try to flip Emily, the oligarch's wife, into helping the intelligence services find out where her husband's money is, because it's all on offshore accounts, and to try to take that money off the table. So the new Russian president, Viktor, cannot use it for whatever nefarious plans he has. So it actually was patterned on John le Carré's The Night Manager, which is one of my favorite spy stories, which takes, an agent, an officer, and just drops him into the nest of bad guys. And he has to make his way around. So that's the story. And I think it has a good voice. Like, Emily's chapters really pull you along, very emotional. Mm-hmm. But then you get the day-to-day, like what would really happen in order for the intelligence services to do an operation like this.
Wow. When you started writing that, was because now, of course, that's super pertinent. I mean, that's very now, today. What was happening at the time when you conceived of that idea?
Yes. So I started reading it in 2019. I turned the manuscript in, and the invasion of Ukraine happened shortly afterwards.
Oh, wow.
Me, like every spy novelist I knew, we had all been focusing on the Russia of that time, right? And we were projecting our scenarios on what everyone was thinking might happen. And all that got blown up as soon as they went into Ukraine. So my editor said, you know, it doesn't really work now. You're going to have to rework it. So I did, figured out what needed to change, handed it in, and then events on the ground moved super fast. I've worked in a lot of war rooms. I'm here to tell you that was super fast. So it just kept, things would happen that would change this, you know, the scenario and where things were going every day. I rewrote it a second time. And as I was working on the third time, I said, this is unsustainable, right? Because as you know, it takes about 18 months from when you hand in a manuscript until it's published. This could not go on for 18 months. So I said, I got to get ahead of this, of what's happening in Ukraine. And I thought, what's the one thing everybody wants to see? Putin disappear. Well, let's give it to him. But
oh, wonderful.
You can't do that, right? But what if the cure is worse than the disease? And so that gave me the idea for, you know, Victor Kosygin having his own agenda, and you know, the West having to play catch up and figure him out. So yeah, that was a real exercise in how do you fix something like that.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, so Red London just bumped way up on, like, as soon as I finish the book I'm reading, I have to read this, especially because it's so like at this moment, you know.
It is at the moment, yeah. When I first conceived of it, it's because when I was an analyst in the 90s, I was watching what was happening. You know, the Soviet Union imploding. It was trying to make its transition to a democracy. Seeing the machinations with the old guard, particularly, you know, the KGB, the Internal Security Service, which had such a hold on the country. What did it mean for them? At the same time that England, which was in a terrible recession, decided they were going to offer these get out of jail free cards for foreigners who wanted to invest in the British economy, basically inviting all the oligarchs with their new money, their ill-gotten gains, to come and live in England. And now here we are 20 years later, where they've really dug into the British economy, and yet, you know, they're basically bad guys. What is Britain going to do about it? I knew back in 1994 when this was happening that this was not going to have a happy ending, right? I certainly didn't think I'd write a book about it, but it came back to me. And this sounds terrible, but I'm really lucky that England kind of woke up and decided to do the sanctions and stuff like that, because that puts it right in the middle of the story.
Yeah. Wow. So that is a good, for anybody who is aspiring to be a writer, what goes into the back of these books that we create. Even going back to The Taker, which we started this conversation on, you said 10 years of you putting that together. And then, of course, all the other stuff that happens with it, where I think a lot of times, and this is leading into my next question, a lot of times aspiring writers or people new to this kind of think you're going to come in, you're going to write the perfect book, and kabam, you know, somebody's going to look over, there's going to be an agent looking over your shoulder in the coffee shop as you're writing longhand and just go, oh, that's amazing. You know, let's launch you up there with Stephen King, you know, or Alma Katsu, or, you know, and so that's not the case. What do you have advice for, say, somebody just getting into this, or sitting there with that first manuscript wondering why the heck this isn't going anywhere? What would you tell them?
Well, I feel your pain. I mean, we all go through that, right? I mean, I went through so many rejections. You've really got to kind of train yourself to try to learn from them. People aren't rejecting you just because they're evil. I mean, they have a reason for it. And they may or may not tell you. And as you get better and have more time in the game, they'll be more likely to spend time with you and sort of explain what's going on. But I think what's deceptive is a lot of times when we start out, we write something and we think, oh, this is just as good as this book that I read. Well, that book might not have been very good. I'm sorry, right? Like, I know I thought that way. Here was this book that was okay, but wasn't going to set anybody's socks on fire, right? When you're trying to sell your debut, you have to set their socks on fire. It can't just be good enough. It's got to be extraordinary, right? it can't be a copy of this book that you like. You've got to make it different somehow. It's really hard. It's really hard to thread that needle, but that's what it takes. This is my advice, and I know people hate it, but it's absolutely true. You have to write an undeniable book, a book that really any agent is going to want, because as soon as they read it, they'll say, I know I can sell that book. That's the question you have to answer. The other thing, I don't know if it applies now as much as when I was starting out, because I know there's a lot of different services to help people connect with agents. But when I was starting, what was really important to know, you had to know your book really well. And by that, I mean like what your comps were, who your ideal audience was, especially those comps. You wanted a book that was as much like your book. And then you had to find out who was the agent who sold it, you know, and which publisher did they sell it to? Because the trick is not every editor wants every book, right? Even if it's in a certain genre, they like a particular kind of book. And it's the agent's job to know which editor is buying what. And editors do tend to buy from the same agents over and over again because that agent knows their tastes. So you want the agent who already knows how to sell your book, who knows who's going to buy it, et cetera, has their ear. So you're kind of, I don't want to say wasting your time. It's never wasting your time to get your name in front of an agent. But if you really want to cut down on the number of no's, you've got to do that homework up front and find out and be brutally honest with yourself, right? You know, you may not be the great literary writer that you thought you were. Your book maybe is a little bit more genre or commercial. You got to be brutally honest and find those comps.
Oh, thank you. It's such a good advice. And on the side, you bring up that it's a business. So when we're writing it, it is a work of passion. But I think like probably any successful artist of any genre, musician, painter, you know, Salvador Dali, it has to be marketable. So it can be your passion project, but your passion project might not necessarily sell to there's a choice there. You know, What do you want to do? Do you want to do the unpublishable novel that is your dream? Okay. But then don't complain that it's not selling.
Yeah.
Because it's a business.
Yeah. You have to be honest with yourself. And I talk about this too. And I did Clarion last summer. I was a teacher for a while. And, you know, that's a cohort of promising writers, but they're starting out. And, you know, it's very typical. I'll try to tell them, you know, things they have to work on. And their reaction, which I think is common for a lot of people when they started out, I certainly felt this way in grad school. You would tell yourself, well, I don't need the big commercial book. I'm doing something different. I'm writing this in this niche, you know, and that's what I'm going to do. But in reality, it was, I didn't know how to change that story from this quirky, but not really finished story into something that's going to appeal to more writers. And we kind of protect our egos by telling ourselves, well, that's not what I want. Be honest with yourself. That is what you want. You want to be published by one of the big five, right? Go for it. But you're going to hurt
nothing wrong with that.
There's nothing wrong with that. And you're going to hurt yourself if you lie to yourself.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That is like one of the things I'm like, nothing is wrong. There's nothing wrong with saying you want to make millions of dollars or whatever your dream is. You know, that's not wrong. But we have to go for that. We can't complain. You can't not be on social media and then complain nobody knows about you.
Absolutely.
You know,
so frustrating. I want to be a really successful person, but I don't have the time to do social media. Well, guess what? You don't want to be a successful person, or you better have that second job so you can hire someone to do your social media.
Mm-hmm, exactly. And I don't think there's probably anybody I know that wakes up and goes, I love social media. I'm going to get on there and I'm going to do all my posts. I love it so much. I mean, you have to do it. You just got to.
And it's tough. It's tough.
But we are just about out of time, but I feel like I could talk to you for like hours and hours. I will not make you suffer through that. tell me, like, as we wrap up, tell me where you've got Red London out right now. What else is coming up? Like, tell us where we can find you, all the good things. Of course, there's going to be links in the description of this show, but what can we ravenously devour from Alma Katsu? Not Alma herself, because we already talked about cannibalism is
No
bad.
eating.
No eating actual Alma, but all her work.
Well, The Fervor is the last horror novel that I wrote. And like you said, I've been very lucky. It was nominated for the Stoker for Best Novel. It was also nominated for Best Thriller by International Thriller Writers. I'm amazed at, these are two different genres. It got nominated in two genres. And this is my second year in a row to be nominated for Best Thriller, which is insane. This book got incredible reviews, like 3-star industry starred reviews. New York Times, called it a feat of storytelling. I love this book because it's very personal to me, the Japanese internment. So if you want to read something that I think is among my best work, read this. I also had a short story come out on Amazon Original Stories if you're a Kindle person. It's called The Werewolf. That was also nominated for a Stoker. And it's set in Germany at the end of World War II. And it's about a group of resistors who, they're afraid now that they're losing the war and the Allies are coming across Germany. And this is true. They were very afraid of what would happen. And so they were forming resistance units. And this is a group in this particular fairy tale village who decide they're going to tap into their village's unique historic past to try to throw off the Allies. And all you have to do is look at the title to know what that is. So there's that. I have another Amazon short coming out this summer. It's called Black Vault, and it's actually goes back to the spy side, but it's a little science fiction-y. It's about UFOs.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that one. So that's everything on the docket, I think. Wow. Thank you so much. If people want to follow me, the best way is to subscribe to my newsletter because, social media, the algorithm is very unpredictable. So if you go to my website, which is just my name, Alma Katsu, and books, almakatsubooks.com, you'll get a pop-up. I would really appreciate it if you sign up because that's the only way I know I'm actually talking to people.
I'm going there next after I hit unrecord or stop recording, end recording to go do that. That is awesome because I would love to connect with you because, oh my gosh, what have you not covered? I'm like UFOs, werewolves. You're kind of going down my list of things that fascinate Angela and sends her on rabbit trail research trips in the middle of the night.
Yeah, it's funny. I never thought I'd write a werewolf story, for instance, because I'm actually not a big werewolf fan. Mm-hmm. But it was really fun and the same thing with UFOs. So, yeah, I know there's a lot we haven't talked about. Hey, are you going to StokerCon this year? I'm going to try. It depends on my visa right now. That was the emergency appointment yesterday. So hopefully by the time this is airing, I have my visa and I'm headed to StokerCon. But yeah, I would love to because I try to just never miss. But that would be awesome to catch up. Yeah, that'd be great. Let me know. Yeah. Oh, and then I didn't even get to the internment camp. There's so many questions that I would love to do this again anytime. My stack of questions is like, but I mean, that's credit to you as being such an interesting, amazing person and writer. So, I mean, the fact that I'm reading The Fervor twice and wanting to go through and pick out all the research details, because my grandmother was in an internment camp, she said. So that really reflected to me this is because you captured that character so beautifully. I mean, this is what it was like. These are the fears. This is the real thing, the minutia that you would worry about, that we don't think of it in the historical way. Right. My mom is Japanese. She came from Japan. And so part of it was her experiences with Americans after the war. She had some horrendous experiences. But my husband's family is also Japanese American, and they were all interned. So this is 30 years of hearing stories, but also my husband and I did a lot of research on it, watched documentaries, read books. So it really is reflective of the actual experiences of the people who were in the camps. And yeah, I could go on all day about it. It's a really important chapter in American history, and unfortunately one that we're losing because most of the people in the camps are now very elderly. And yeah.
And it's those things that we don't want to talk about as Americans, that we'd never do that, you know.
Right.
We're the
Well,
Boy
I
Scouts
do
of
a
the
whole
world.
history. Yeah, I do a whole history segment on it as to why it was this very un-American thing to do. But anyway, yeah, I'd love to talk about it sometime.
All right.
The
Well,
paperback's in the fall.
I'm sorry?
The paperback's coming out in the fall.
Oh, awesome. Okay. Okay. Well, now that because I had to leave all my books in the US when I came to Brazil. So I think I've bought the Fervor like 4 times now. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, now I'm going to buy it here. Well, now I need it on ebook now. So now I'm going to get the paperback.
Oh, I'll send you one when it comes out.
Oh, no. Shipping to Brazil is not a fun thing. So, well, thank you so much for being here. You are amazing. Your work is amazing. Go sign up for Alma's newsletter right now if you're not there already. And we are going to close this segment with the mid-journey prompt. So I've taken a line out of your book, The Fervor, and it's how your book starts. The island is windy and perpetually damp. Fed that into mid-journey, and this is the art that came from it that you're about to see. I invite everybody to write a flash fiction or a poem or whatever, publish it on your own medium, and then share the link in the comments so that I can go read this and comment on your work based on Alma's work. But yeah, I love doing this. This is so fun. And thank you so much. You are amazing.
Thank you so much. Thanks. And I can't wait. I hope we get to see each other in Pittsburgh.
I do too. I'm crossing my fingers. I love Brazil, but it would be awesome to go back and do some American things.
Yeah.
Which is not glamping.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody who watched today.